If you've written a screenplay and if you eventually want to sell it, the way you're going to seduce someone into requesting your script is to have a fantastic logline. And there's a lot of things to consider when crafting a logline, but there's something that nearly all successful loglines have that unsuccessful ones don't: stakes. But before you start thinking, oh, I know what stakes are, I'm gonna bet that even if you do know what it is, you're probably not doing it in your screenplay. Here are the stakes that nearly every aspiring screenwriter thinks about. The stakes of what it will cost the protagonist if they fail in whatever it is they're trying to do. So if the protagonist doesn't get what they're pursuing, the world will end, or their spouse will die, or their kid will die, or their spouse and their kid will die while the world ends. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. We all think naturally about these types of stakes. And those are the stakes you must absolutely have, of course, but those aren't the stakes I'm talking about. The stakes I'm talking about are, what does it cost the protagonist if they do nothing? Because what you need for a successful story is you need the protagonist to be presented with the predicament, also known as the inciting incident, and then the protagonist wrestles with the decision of whether to do something or not. Sometimes they wrestle for a while, sometimes it's just a few seconds, because the protagonist is weighing the decision. Should they jump into the fray or not? Should they solve the problem or not? And the thing is, there must be two avenues or two levels of stakes. One set of stakes if the protagonist does nothing, and another but bigger set of stakes if they do something. Now, if they do nothing, no reward. If they do something, a potential reward. So doing nothing equals stakes but no reward, while doing something equals bigger stakes but potential reward. Another way to think about it is to think of stakes as cost. I mean, that may help you because it has to cost the protagonist something. Doesn't matter what they do. It's going to cost them if they don't go, and it's going to cost them if they do. It may not cost them a lot, but it's going to cost them something. Over here, it might cost them a lot, but it's still got to cost them something. You got to have both. And the protagonist has to choose whether or not to embark on a quest. And if they don't go, it's going to cost them something for sitting at home doing nothing. Plus, that just makes for a bad movie. Or they're going to embark on a quest and it's probably going to cost them more, but they need a choice between the two. And if there is no choice, that's when your movie feels predictable and cliche and like something that we've already seen, so it doesn't feel unique. And when I do script consultations, one thing that regularly comes up are the stakes. I see what's going to happen if the protagonist doesn't complete the quest or whatever. So the protagonist is choosing to do something, I can see what the stakes are going to be. But when I ask, so what happens if the protagonist stays home? And the answer is, well, nothing. And that's a big problem, because why would anyone choose pain? They wouldn't. Okay, people make choices to avoid pain. And so the protagonist must recognize that either choice they're forced to make has some pain. They have to choose one. It's just that one of them hurts less with no potential for reward, and the other hurts more, but there's a large potential for reward. And here's another thing that causes some problems. So many scripts by new writers have a passive protagonist. And a passive protagonist is trying to choose their status quo life. Okay, they don't want anything to change, even if that means that they will continue to experience the pain or the cost of doing nothing. But the problem is, a lot of new scripts, there's just no pain there to begin with. So if you're going to have a passive protagonist and they're choosing the status quo, it's still going to cost them something. It has to cost them something. It won't cost them potentially as much as pursuing the thing. So the passive protagonist is still choosing a direction. They're just choosing one with lower stakes. But there's still stakes. You know, maybe as they go along, they might realize like, oh, you know what? I really should go after the other thing because this is still painful. At least I'll get a reward if I go after the other thing. So maybe they choose that. But when a protagonist chooses to do nothing and just continue embracing the pain in their life, audiences typically hate that. Just like we hate it in real life when we see our friends or family members who are living in pain and have the opportunity to do something about it, but they don't. And if we really care about them, it ticks us off. So why would readers like a main character that does that? They don't. Most stories that are considered mainstream have an active protagonist, though. those stories, they're more fun, they're easier to be involved with. So if you're going to take any advice, opt for an active protagonist in your script. You'll have a better shot at someone wanting to read your script, but only if you communicate both levels of stakes in the logline, the pain of doing nothing and the pain of doing something. And you will need a logline. You're going to need a short, simple way to communicate what your story is about, so people will actually request your script. And successful loglines include both levels of stakes. But it's not just the loglines that need both levels of stakes. Your screenplay needs both levels. The protagonist needs to know what it costs them if they do nothing. You know, sometimes the protagonist comes to recognize how awful their current situation actually is. And the stakes for doing nothing might be like, well, you know, it just doesn't get any better than this. So maybe you have a story about a guy who just hates his job, but he takes it out on his family. And one day the wife is all, you know what, I'm out. And she packs up the kids and she's gone. And the guy has a choice. He can stay in his new current situation, lose his family, continue hating his job, and probably be a hateful and angry and lonely person, or he can go after them and try to keep his family together. But if he goes after them, it's entirely possible he could lose his job, his house, and everything he still has left. So doing nothing costs him his family and maybe his dignity and happiness, the first level of stakes. But going after them could cause him to lose everything else, and there's no guarantee of success, and he will be worse off than he is right now. So there's a potential for reward because he's going to keep his family together, but it's going to cost him. And the protagonist has to recognize the stakes in both options and then choose to go after one of them, preferably the option with the reward potential. And when you write your logline, you need to include the stakes for both options, because then the person requesting the script will really understand what's at stake. If you want to know more about the components of story and what you need to actually have a story that works, be sure to get my book, which is linked below. If you want to know more about loglines, watch this. Don't forget about fun buttons that help this video find others who need to see it, and other links below that might be helpful to you. And when you tell a story that matters. See you later.